Hey everyone, this is Chess Coach Aaron, and I'm here from my third game out of three for playing the Grand Prix attack as black. We are facing c4 as black, and we're treating it as if they're playing Sicilian. Now, you can think of this as a Sicilian reversed, and the Grand Prix idea is for white versus the Sicilian, but we're going to use it as black against white when they play c4. Now, they get an extra move, and this can be important, so always keep your eyes open. You can't quite do the moves in the same manner. You got to be a little bit more suspicious of certain things, and you want to get castled as soon as you can. So I played this game somewhat recently, a couple weeks ago, and this is yet another idea that can occur during the game, and that's really all I'm trying to focus on is the opening. And again, the first 8, maybe 10, maybe 12 moves are really what we're going to talk about. And again, this was a shorter game, so maybe I'll just fly through the last moves. And this is a 3-minute blitz game, so those last moves aren't quite as important because anything can happen in fast blitz, especially. But we want to talk about the beginning preparation for the Grand Prix attack. The idea is black. So they played c4. I'm playing e5. They played g3. Got to get their light squared bishop somewhere useful, right? Since their pawn is on c4. And immediately I get my pawn duo set up. The beginnings of the Grand Prix attack idea. Got to get my snowplow, as I like to call it. All right, they put the bishop on a long diagonal. Why not? And as soon as I can, I shore up the windiness. I don't want any issues, and I want to try to castle as soon as possible. So whenever I play my f-pawns forward as white or black, I'm always trying to play knight f6 as black and knight f3 as white pretty quickly, because I want to cover up that windiness, as I call it. All right, let's keep going. And very typical setup. They played at knight to c3, and as soon as they do that, I like to try to get my dark squared bishop to aim at it, out of the way for castling, and double their pawns, and get that dark squared bishop just out of the way. Trade it away if I can. I don't want to think about it. It can be a headache. If it ends up being on c5, though, I use it as much as I can as a weapon to control the sweet center and kingside attack and aim at their king, of course. But I still rather just get rid of my bishop. I've said this quite a few times. That's the way I like to play the Grand Prix attack. Everyone's different. Try what works for you, but this is what I like to do, for sure. All right, they played e3, and you've seen this in a couple of my other videos where I say it, and I'm going to keep saying it. I get very suspicious of moves which early on are going to put all your pawns on one color. I feel like you're creating weaknesses when you don't need to. You're giving your opponent opportunities to play a certain way, and you don't have to give them these opportunities. Now, why are they playing e3? Why are they putting all their pawns on these dark squares so early and creating light square holes? Holes. Well, they're doing it maybe to save a move, right? They kind of want to play d4 as soon as possible, but they'd rather have a pawn capture back on d4 if black captures. I'm not going to. I'm going to keep the game closed. I'm going to either go forward or keep my pawn there myself because I'm going to trade my bishop for the knight. So I want to keep the game closed and use my 2 knights to the best they can in a closed environment. But that being said, the white player doesn't quite know that yet. And if they try to move their d-pawn forward, well, the knight's pinned. Maybe they don't like that. Could pile on the pin perhaps at some point, or, double up the pawns anyway. But they play the e-pawn forward because they want to save a move, and instead of going d3 here, they want to go d4 in one move. They don't want to go d3 and then later in the game d4. That gives black an extra move. So they're trying to do small pawn move support, large pawn move. But by playing e3 and trying to save this move, save one move, and that does make sense, they're giving black opportunities. Now, I don't always aim for taking advantage of them as soon as possible, but you already have these ideas of playing a very quick e4 for black because the pawn now is starting to control some light squares. Follow this up with this knight going to c6 and then e5, and this is a very common idea. There are a lot of players as white or as black in this type of position. They'll play this in a heartbeat. Boom. They want to control these squares, and you're inviting it. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. And after the capture and going forward, that's definitely a way to play. I would capture and go forward. All right, but after I capture, I don't always go forward. Many times I'll start to do development. And here, if I'm not going to go forward, and lock down their bishop, which I like to do. Instead, really the most accurate move is probably d6. And that is simply, again, once you get these doubled pawns, you don't want them to easily go forward and undouble them. So in this position, these double pawns are not happy. If I play d6, I'm making so there's no shenanigans. They can't just play a pawn forward easily because I'll get a free pawn. Here, by playing a knight out, that actually gives an opportunity to go forward. And some players do play this. Now, I'm not really scared of it, but it does help white a little bit. So the most accurate move, if I don't have to put my knight out right away, is to play d6 and control c5. All right, so I played knight out, and they played knight to e2, which is another reason why some people play, e3 to make this spot available for their knight. It makes sense. But again, they're still inviting. I could play e4 now and follow up with knight e5, and I don't know. This is not a great idea for white. So sometimes I do admit in slower games, not speed games, slower games, I do play this. This is like a positional style, attacking weak squares, and when the knight is on e5, it's even attacking a loose pawn, so why not? But in blitz games, faster games, I usually try to keep the Grand Prix idea of attacking on the king side, expansion. I try to keep this available and the idea alive as long as possible. But definitely, this is a great way to play, pushing the pawn forward and trying to take control of these light squares. All right, so I played d6, they castled, I castled, and now there's a bunch of ideas, but we're just going to look at what they played, which is simply d4. And they did save that move. They did play e3, and in one move get in d4. But now let's look a little bit closer and talk about the ideas in this type of position, because this is very common also, these type of setups, both if you're white playing the Grand Prix and if you're black playing the Grand Prix. And that is, and this is one of the reasons why I love the doubled pawns, they have doubled c-pawns. Is this really something that white would do, which is, would they capture with their d-pawn on my e-pawn? The answer, should be no, because these c-pawns are very weak. They're very slow and cumbersome to move forward and to use. Last thing you want to do if you're white is trade away this d-pawn and make their c-pawns double isolated pawns. Very weak. This gives a permanent advantage to black as long as the game goes on. The longer the game goes on, this is a permanent advantage for black. Especially if we take back, how are these pawns going to trade away and we can focus on them. And even if they take and we don't take with our d-pawn, let's say we take the knight, or let's say we take with the queen later, they're still isolated, and if we can get in b6, and d6 control c5, so this would be a structure. Our pawns would be like this, and they would have these 4 pawns, and notice these would be gone. Boom, these would be gone. This would be a permanent advantage for black in a long game, and in a slower time control, that's definitely how I play now and then. Notice when you play b6, you also could bring some pressure with this bishop, and now can go to a6 on the c-pawn. There's many times when you play a little bit slower and more positionally, knight a5 can be a very strong move. It also focuses on that pawn. And knight going to the side, we like to say knight in the rim, is pretty grim, but they don't have a b-pawn to threaten our knight. So it can be actually very strong here. And if our bishop gets on this diagonal, it can be very annoying to white. And now if we get in our e4, their bishop's bad. Our bishop on a6 can be strong. So these are definitely some ideas. And another reason why I'm not really worried about that is, again, these are going to be isolated, but you're making a knight, if I take with the knight, go closer to the king side. Always makes me happy. But I also like to play this way, which is, instead, I dodge their d-pawn and go forward, making their bishop unhappy. And if they ever go forward with the d-pawn, well, my knight just jumps onto e5, and again, it's a great position. So they almost, after I go e4 and they go d5, but if I go e4, they probably shouldn't go d5. It almost makes these pawns kind of stuck in a spot a little bit, because it actually helps white. And if they go forward, again, I can take, and they take back, and now they have, again, 2 isolated double c-pawns. Very bad for the long game. So I go forward. Are they going to go forward? No. And I go forward. Are they going to go forward? No. At least you would think not. So sometimes in a slower position, again, I play this way. But you can play queen e8 if you don't want to move forward to e4 right away. Queen e8 is great. You don't want to trade queens. You're not worried about them taking, and you're doing your Grand Prix ideas of coming over to the king side. Makes sense. And one last choice. When they go d4, you can actually do an immediate. Some players play immediate knight a5. And again, you're putting pressure on them because you're attacking this pawn. And yes, your king is on this diagonal, so be a little careful. They have a queen that can jump onto that diagonal also. But with the bishop over here on g2, it's not going to jump on this diagonal and pin anything, right? You can always play king over, out of the way, which makes sense, and every so often I do it, especially when I'm going to expand, so that makes sense. But the knight here does target their pawn, so they have to deal with this. Also, it protects the b pawn, which when they have that bishop aiming at it, this could be important, right? This is a very hard knight to get rid of also. They can try to send the queen over to try to get rid of it, but it takes some work. We could always go forward and just protect it. Later on, if we move our rook out of the way, we can go b6, and that protects it. And that also allows our bishop to come out this way if needed. So we have a lot of options here. And remember, if we go forward, this bishop is now blocked, so we're not worried about playing b6 also. Just to throw that out there. So you can play knight a5 in this position. All right, so let's back it up. I actually played, they played d4, and I played e4. And that does give them f4 rather, sorry, for their knight. But I'm already planning to play queen e8. And I have two things controlling h5. And now that means they can't make their knight go to h5, and I can play g4, and I'm g5. I keep thinking I'm white here. G5, and I'm rolling forward. I'm doing my kingside expansion ideas with a Grand Prix attack. All right, so I played e4, and they jumped right into that new hole, f4 for the knight. Why not? Stronger. And I moved queen e8, and now you got to start just also paying attention to c7. When you start leaving c7 alone, there are times they get knights into the center. Here it would be d5, and it's targeting that pawn. So you have to deal with it a couple ways. Many times you can just take their knight. That gets rid of it, and your knight can now, your other knight can swing attacking a pawn, but it can swing to the king side. So that's nice. You get your queen side knight over to the king side. And again, having these pawns kind of doubled and slow, does it make a difference if their pawn is over here? It actually doesn't. In some ways, having these two pawns stuck here make it better for black's defense, because their own bishop can't get through their pawns and can't get through the pawns, even though I already have a pawn here, if they have these two pawns in the way. So it actually helps black a bit. So I knew they were going to play the knight here. I mean, I expected them to anyway. And I played queen e8, and now again, white's got a lot of opportunities here. They decided to move the rook over and put pressure. Makes some sense. And here, black has a lot of choices also. Now, I can go right away, and I could play g5. This is probably the spiciest version, where you're making it very windy, whoop, into your king area, but you're relying on these pawns kind of blocking everything up. And you're making this knight move. Usually it'll go to d5, right? Where else will it go? Can't go here. I got two things covering h5. Going back doesn't quite make sense. I probably go queen g3 at that point. Or I could go b6 at this point also. And I could try to focus on this pawn with the knight and the bishop. And don't forget, even the queen on f7 could be sneaky against that pawn. And if we ever force their d pawn to go forward, our knight jumps right into e5, which is very nice. So we could focus on this pawn. That's another idea. So what we can play against the rook b1, well, we can play knight a5 again, and again that protects here, focuses on that pawn. If they go forward, we can double these pawns and they're isolated, long-term advantage. We can play b6 right away. Again, we're trying to control c5. Going forward would mean we win a pawn. We're letting this bishop come out. And those are some of the main ideas. I decided to play a waiting move and just kind of get my king off of this diagonal for the moment, off the light square diagonal, preparing g5. All right, show just a couple more moves, and we're kind of done with the opening. I'll fly through the rest of the moves real quick. It wasn't that long a game, just so you can see kind of what happened. But again, black here is already doing very well. Some of the strategic ideas for this spicy advance is I'm going to get g5, and I'm going to punch through f4. I'm going to open up that line either getting the queen over at some point. I'm going to punch through with a pawn going forward. I'm going to expand and, maybe play b6 and stop any shenanigans on the queen side. And utilize this bishop, the knight, the queen, whoops, get out of the way, the queen, this rook, and sometimes you just move the bishop up a little bit, bring the other rook over, and use both rooks. Notice, almost all the pieces can come into play for black on the king side, and if they go forward, basically all the pieces can. But if they play knight d5, which is the most normal move against g4, then you got to worry about c7. All right. So they played bishop a3 to try to make it active, perhaps play c5 with a pawn so they don't have to take back with the pawn. And I attack that knight. They go to d5, and I'll just say real quick what I played. There were some choices. I played queen f7. I put two attackers on his pawn. I'm protecting the c-pawn, and through there I'm aiming at their c-pawn just in case. I figured this would force them to take. But the truth is, again, that's one way to play it, but probably the best line is just simply, again, take, take, and I have some choices here. I like knight e7 the best. I'm attacking this pawn. They kind of have to play c4 as the best move just to protect it, and now black has a lot of options, and these will be the last things we talk about. Could go forward with a surprising g4, and that would lock down their king side, and I could actually bring a rook over. Whoops. Get out of the way. Bring the rook over to the H line, and then I could also bring the queen over to the H line. And that would be a serious battery down at H line with the pawn already covering this. Probably going to win a pawn sooner or later with a lot of pressure. And I can still play b6 at the right time. Try to get this bishop in. Punch through again. F4 at the right time, opening up this position. So there are some choices here. I could play pawn forward. I could work on getting f5. That means I could swing my knight over to g6 to support f5, and my queen would be protecting the e-pawn. Again, I can get b6, bishop up, and the other rook over also once I get my queen out of the way. So there are a lot of continuations to keep making your pieces happier. But let's get back to what was played. And I played g5, attacking the knight. Knight went d5. I said queen f7. All right, I'm just going to run through the rest of the moves real quick so you see them, and we'll be done. Capture, capture. They go forward. I dodge that, and that makes this bishop very unhappy. All right, they're trying to open things up still, and now notice black is keeping everything closed. That if my knight ends up on d5, it supports f5, and it keeps this closed. Remember, a closed game is, you have 8 pawns for each side, 7 pawns for each side, sometimes 6. You don't want to trade too many pawns and open too many lines. So this is already black doing very well, I think, to close the position because f5 is going to happen. So I don't see how white's going to stop f5. All right, they made a couple moves, and let's just run through some of these. You can kind of see what happened here, and now they're trying to put pressure on the queen side. There's really not enough pressure, and one more move because this rook was actually pinned just for a moment. So did I really have to play my bishop up? Probably not even. But I didn't even think about it, just in case. I unite my rooks. Always smart. This f5 break is not going anywhere. And save the pawn. And there's just no way for white at this point to really stop what black is doing. They didn't fight off black's ideas well enough. They only played a little bit too much on the queen side, which is fine. When you play the Grand Prix attack, you kind of let your opponent do stuff on the other side of the board. You're working on the king side, which is where the kings are, so that's going to be a little bit more pressure than queen side. You don't want to give away the whole queen side in the wrong way, but of course, you want to expand on the king side, usually when you get your Grand Prix attack. All right, so let's just run through these moves. You can just kind of see what happened here. All right. So, fun game in Blitz, 3 minutes. That can happen. It's not always going to happen. We get those kind of king side attacks or center expansion through snowplow, but those are some of the ideas I'm looking for when I play the Grand Prix attack as white or black. But you can play the Grand Prix attack as black against c4. All right, let's get a quick joke in. Why did the teddy bear refuse dessert after dinner? Now, I always love a good dessert after dinner. I always try to leave a little room, and there's always room for dessert. But why did the teddy bear refuse dessert. Well, this is simply because the teddy bear was stuffed. All right, guys. Play some Grand Prix Attack. Get used to it. Get your hands on the pieces. Try it out. This is Coach Aaron out. Peace.